I think we can all agree an AI revolution is underway. It's hard to keep up. New models pop up every single day. Many significant players and thought leaders in the industry claim AGI, in its many different definitions, is right around the corner. The job market has already changed. In the tech industry alone, traditional job postings are at its lowest since 2018. New jobs are emerging, and AI has been widely adopted to increase the productivity of traditional roles. Where are we going from here? Are we ready? Do we even know what being ready means? I am going deep into these questions today with my guest, Jason Gray. Let me tell you this. Jason has been coding for the last 40 years, and he has been in the machine learning AI world for the last 15 years of his life. He's seen and lived through various cycles of technology evolution, but I will venture to say he's never been as excited or scared or both at the same time as today. Enough intro already. Let's get to it, folks. Jason, thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me, and great end to that intro. That's very accurate.
Uh, Jason, can you share the pivotal moment in your career that led you to specialize in AI and technology?
Well, as you said, I've been programming for a long time, and as the years went on, I got more and more interested in machine learning and AI. I'm not particularly a math person, but I think when you see what those techniques and algorithms can do to benefit a user experience or benefit a group of people or implement a business process in a really efficient way, that's what I get excited about. And AI and ML happen to just do that very well. And I also like a good technical challenge and pushing myself. As I said, I'm not a trained mathematician, but I perhaps play one on TV. Read a lot of math books, and try to train myself up into the calculus and linear algebra and so on and so forth. Um, but I really appreciate working with data scientists as well in that regard, because I'm not one.
I hear you. Look, I'm an attorney. The reason I decided I was going to be an attorney was math were not my strongest place there. But the more I learn about AI, the more I learn about machine learning, etc. Um, and I'm going to say a very ignorant thing, but I want to understand if you there's some truth into this. It's amazing how much of this is just it's probability. It's a system that is finding the probability of an outcome, going back and forth and getting more complex and complex and complex, and that finding the probability is going through more filters and more data and getting more sophisticated by the day. But at the end of it, is it true to say we are finding the probability of the best answer, outcome, etc.?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think that's a really good way to summarize it. And I sort of view, in an overly simplified way, every neuron in a neural net is sort of theoretically assigned to some topic or aspect of what you're analyzing, and you're at every one of those neurons, you're sort of rolling a dice and looking at what the last neuron did and passing that on. And so it is like rolling billions and billions of dice in a
Ah,
way. Yeah.
amazing.
Except that your starting dice perhaps start with certain numbers. So that's probably the one modification.
Right. Uh, let's talk about your current role. Describe your current role, the key projects you're overseeing today.
Yeah, so I'm a CTO at a company called Corp. We're a boutique engineering firm. We do a lot of AI and machine learning, and also traditional software development and integration. Um, Key work that we're working on right now would be Utah Avalanche Center is a pretty exciting project where we're helping to predict avalanches and display that information in a timely manner, first internally to the avalanche forecasters, and then later on, we'll be exposing some of that to the public. So I think that's a pretty exciting project, and we're not in that case, we're not using AI and ML for evil purposes like
Right.
advertising or trying to trick people. We're using it for a good purpose and to hopefully save some people some stress of getting caught in an avalanche.
That's
So I
amazing.
think that's one of the more exciting projects we're working on.
How does that work? Tell me a little bit. Do you have like sensors in the mountains that are picking up all the information, plus the weather analytics, et cetera, et cetera? How do you do that? How you forecast when an avalanche is going to happen?
Yeah, you basically just summarized it. I mean, we take the regular weather forecast into account. And that's something that the folks at the Utah Avalanche Center have been doing for a long time. Um, and they're really the experts in that. They also have various types of sensors out on the different peaks.
Right,
They also have humans that travel to the different peaks when it's appropriate, and they look at the different layers of the snow.
right,
And in this case, we're taking a model that some Swiss Avalanche folks developed, and we're adapting that for the Utah environment. And so we're shifting time zones and adjusting the parameters of what goes into that model so that it works for Utah.
right. Um, let's talk about the evolution of AI. In your view, how advanced are today AI's models compared to those from 5 years ago?
Yes, there. I think obviously they are getting more and more advanced. I mean, 5 years ago was a long time in terms of AI. I'm not even sure if ChatGPT was really a very, very out there at that time. I think, looking at where we came from in the 1970s and 80s and 90s, all the way up through today, yeah, the pace has just been incredible. A lot of that comes in fits and starts where, someone decided to take an MLP and make it deep, and we got deep learning, and that led to some pretty amazing things, and then transformers and so on and so forth. And I think every one of those things that comes along is adding um, pretty amazing and unexpected results. There was a lot of skepticism about even deep learning.
Right,
People thought that was a crazy idea, and then somebody did it and scaled it, and look what we have. And it's like, I think every one of those little techniques adds up, and eventually we're going to get to something that I think does resemble what people are calling AGI. I think there's a lot of ambiguity around what that even means. When I was a kid growing up hacking on the Apple II and various early Macs, artificial intelligence was a dream.
right,
And the what people thought the definition of that was you could be in a online chat typing to a bot and you wouldn't know if it was human or not.
right.
You know, like we surpassed that 10 times over at this point. So the definition of what these things even are, people keep pushing it out. So it's like I would kind of already argue we've got some form of intelligence. I don't think it's human. I don't think it necessarily deserves personhood, but it's also not quote unquote stupid. And so I think, yeah, as we progress over the next very small number of years, I think we are going to have to wrestle with that question of, you know, what where are these lines from a legal point of view and from a philosophical point of view? When does it actually become a person? Or maybe the first question is when is it a true agent? You might hire a lawyer or an advertising agency or somebody that, it's even in the word agency. You know, you hire this person, they do work for hire, you direct them at a high level and they figure out the details and get it done.
Yeah.
That's a work for hire.
Yep.
And when an AI agent can do that, are they something that deserves legal protection? I don't know. These will be interesting questions, but I think they're coming up really rapidly. I mean, we've gone from a few years ago not thinking about this at all to now we're struggling with what these current LLMs are doing with regards to like copyright and fair use and all of these types of legal structures. But those conversations are going really slowly. And by the time we get even close to those, we're going to have to be wrestling with the next thing, which is this proliferation and maturing of what people are calling an agent. And when you start to grant those agents permission to spend money on your behalf or communicate on your behalf or things like that, it's like we're going to have some some stuff to struggle with there. I think
The law goes,
following existing models, I think makes a lot of sense though. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
no, no, sorry. The law goes always very slow, right? Always very slow and always lower but right now it's insane how that gap is, getting larger. It's getting larger, right? The gap between legislation and the new cases that will appear, et cetera, et cetera. And there's a lot of people that don't want any sort of regulation right now, right? That say, hey, no, don't regulate anything. Just let it be. Don't if you regulate, you're going to kill innovation, right? And so that's an argument. We could agree, not agree. I think it's a good argument and it has its point. But it is insane, and you can do some. I understand that you can do some of that already. I haven't tried GPT operator myself, but from what I read, you can allow operator to do like groceries for you, and it will just do everything and get it on order online, and etc etc etc. It's already kind of happening, and then
Yep.
you know, um, so let's go again back a little bit and talk about company you were and are involved with, Common Crawl, right? Common Crawl
Yeah.
influenced the training and the development of AI models. I want to learn more about that. How did that happen, and what did they do?
Yeah, yeah. So Common Crawl is a really interesting organization. They're a nonprofit, and so they're doing large scale web crawling on a relatively regular basis. They've been doing it once a month, give or take, for almost 10 years, maybe. I think since 2000, the early 2010s, I think. And so we have 105 or 106 copies of the internet.
Right.
We crawl the HTML, so that the text only. We don't go after images or anything like that. And the other thing, just to say up front about Common Crawl is the uh, key folks that have been running that for a long time. Sebastian Nagal, we it's been structured so that Common Crawl is extremely polite.
Okay.
It's not going to spam a website with, millions of requests really quickly. It's going to be very particular and grab things according to robots.txt very strictly. And so we're not, in our view, Common Crawl was started uh, by a gentleman that wanted people to be able to compete with Google in a way.
Right.
And I don't know if that's his words, but like that's the way I interpret it is, he started it during the Web 2.0 kind of times when people wanted to develop search engines where crawling was the hard part. Crawling has gotten easier over time, and And over time, people have used the Common Crawl data for search engines, but they've also used it for all kinds of really interesting research into, you know, research into hate speech or research into uh, any manner of behaviors on the internet around content publishing and things like that. And so there are thousands and thousands and thousands of research papers that attribute Common Crawl to being able to do their research. So it's a very, very valuable asset that we all have. And what happened is when people started scaling up language models, that started initially on pretty small blocks of text, private, you know, groups of documents and things like that. And as people wanted to build true large language models, they needed massive amounts of text.
Right.
And Common Crawl happens to have that. And so many of the early LLMs from every company and many LLMs to this day use uh, either directly the Common Crawl data set or various treatments of the data set that have been done by NVIDIA and a couple big groups on Hugging Face, where they take our Common Crawl data and kind of clean it up, filter some things out, and basically kind of prepare it for machine learning so that a data scientist doesn't even need to do that part anymore.
Right.
And so, without Common Crawl, I think a lot of these LLMs probably wouldn't have existed.
Yeah.
Um, and they certainly wouldn't be as good as they are now. Um, and I think, one last thing to say about Common Crawl, just because I really do think it's a super important organization. LLMs happened.
Yeah.
We had a singularity moment there where now websites are using LLMs to produce some content some of the time. Okay. And so you could view it, if you look at the copies of the internet that we have, we know that prior to, say, whatever, ChatGPT 3, we know everything before that is relatively clean, good human generated data.
Right.
And there's us and there's Internet Archive and there's a few other organizations. We're the only groups that have that data. You can't start crawling today and get that data anymore, that pre-LLM data. And so I think it's a very important organization. I urge everybody to go look at the website and look at their mission. They're a very mission-driven organization, and we really do some really great work that I think needs to continue. So
Do people in general know? I didn't know about this, but I'm no, I'm but do people know about this? Do people realize how important this is and the role in?
yeah, yeah, a lot of people know about it in the data science and LLM community because they use our data. I think outside of that, it's not a super well-known organization.
Right.
But our director, Rich, he's working on that, and we have lots of outreach programs that are starting. And yeah, you want to know about that, you can probably interview him. I don't know as much about it.
Is it the only other question I would ask about this is it getting? I would assume that with AI generated content, the data was already growing exponentially, but it's probably getting faster nowadays. Is that true? Is that the stuff that we put on the internet keeps growing and growing and growing, and we keep throwing and creating new stuff?
Yeah, yeah. That's certainly true, and that has been true ever since the internet was a thing. LLMs are not. I think what we try to do at Common Crawl is be really smart about the way that we crawl. And we try to do that in a very even-handed and fair way over the years, such that we fix the size of the crawl within a pretty tight margin of, I think it's around 50 billion pages is what usually makes it into each crawl. And so we're not claiming to create a full copy of the internet every time we do a crawl.
Right.
What we do is we we do these sampled crawls and we crawl some percentage of the pages on each domain that we find, and then try to crawl different pages next time.
Okay.
And so we're not necessarily the most up-to-date source for any given page, but if you look at our corpus across all of the data that we have, we're probably a pretty comprehensive data set.
Amazing. Let's look at the
Yeah,
future.
it's like 9.5 petabytes of data.
Insane. Uh, Looking at the future, what advancements do you anticipate in AI models over the next years?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I'm glad you asked it. Um, I'm maybe a little controversial. Again, I've been following AI for a long time, and before a lot of the large language model and ChatGPT style things came out, in those years, there was a debate that kind of fell to the wayside around whether we should be building these intelligences from the ground up using, purely truthful data sets, knowledge graphs, um, and factual data that we can link together in semantic ways to create a knowledge graph,
Right.
and that's how it's going to get smart. And what happened is these probabilistic models came in and they were very successful, and they are very successful. And I think, as we look past transformers and a few of the things that are coming, you know, right next here in the next year or two, I think what we're going to see is a resurgence in that conversation and starting to combine it with the probabilistic model, where we're taking these knowledge graphs that exist already. You look at like something like Wolfram Alpha, or some of the linking data projects, or many other semantic data projects that have been out there for quite a while. Wikipedia is a great example.
Right.
Wikipedia behind the scenes, a lot of those sidebars are semantic data that is very well organized and very well tagged. And um, taking that, building knowledge graphs so that a model can know what ground truth is going to, I think, take these things to the next level. And you know, again, I'm not a math person, but like I don't know if it's going to be a single model that we can crunch that all into, or if there's a knowledge graph over here and a probabilistic model over here, and something that coordinates them. But I think that's going to be what's on the horizon, and that's where things are going to go from um, you know, some form of a middle intelligence to a super intelligence, where it's smarter than any and all human on the planet, kind of a thing. So yeah.
And that happens because the system, let me put it in like super simple words, it's reasoning in a different way because the input of the data becomes different as well. What is the fundamental change that will get us to that super intelligence?
I I think you're giving it with the knowledge graph, you're giving the model a much stronger factual skeleton
Right.
for it to hang those probabilities off of. And I think the definitions around general intelligence and super intelligence that have come out over the past few months are making more sense to me, where a general intelligence would be considered a model or a system that is as smart or smarter than a human in a specialty field. So take law.
Yep.
So a general intelligence would be a model that can practice law as good or better than a lawyer,
Right.
and 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 probably any lawyer on the planet, because they've got a bigger memory.
Right.
A super intelligence would be um, a model that could be dropped into a situation that it doesn't even know. So, for instance, a general intelligence would need to be trained on law.
Yeah.
Super intelligence would know enough about the world, and perhaps it knows a lot about, say, 10 domains of human expertise, but you can drop it into an 11th domain or a 12th domain of something that it doesn't know anything about. So maybe you drop it into how to build a rocket.
Right.
Well, you didn't train it on how to build a rocket, but you trained it on physics and you trained it on astronomy and you trained it on whatever else you need to know to build a rocket. I don't know what that is, but you drop it in and you say, build me a rocket. And a super intelligence will be able to do that again better than any human ever could, and also without really knowing that domain. And so this is where I think the knowledge graphs are really going to come in handy, is because a lot of those model a lot of the basic physical properties of our world. And that's where, you take this model and you teach it physics and chemistry and, all those kind of subjects that you might go to college for. And then you drop it in and say, solve global warming.
Yeah.
And maybe it can do it at that point. And then I would call that a super intelligence, because it's solving these problems that we've obviously never been able to solve for ourselves.
So I have so many follow-up questions. I will try to stay focused. Um, today already, right? Because we can think about many scenarios in the future, but today, how is AI currently reshaping job roles and industries as per your knowledge?
Yeah, yeah. So I think uh, you look perhaps a year or two ago, what I think you didn't see a lot of impact to the actual job market itself. What you saw is a lot of clever, open-minded people, developers, lawyers, what have you, starting to experiment and use these models in their work.
Right.
Programmers using the various coding models. I know for a fact there's various law firms and law abiding or law adjacent companies that are building law models,
Yep.
and they're starting to do that. And I think what we're seeing like this year even and late last year is companies are starting to make hiring decisions around the productivity that comes with those.
Mm.
I don't think AI, even when we get to agents or AGI, which I think AGI is no more than a year or two away, where we can create this agent or non-agent based model that can do the job of, say, a lawyer, like you may have learned, it can do that job better than most lawyers.
Right.
Already been research papers, even the LLMs from last year are practically as good as a normal, mid-level lawyer.
Yep.
So like that's not a arguable thing. It's a fact. And so I think what's going to happen is, companies are going to start hiring less, and they're not going to necessarily lay everybody off right away, but over time we're going to need less and less people to do that same work. And so I think you can do the napkin math on what that means. And, it doesn't mean we're all going to be out of work this year, but what are the people just coming up going to do? If we had the need for a million software engineers, um, that has now changed. If a million software engineers are graduating from college, they've entered the job market and they're now all juniors.
Yeah.
By the time they become seniors, we're going to need half as many.
Yeah.
What does that mean? I, this is where I think, as a society, we need to start making some decisions around, what these agents are and are not allowed to do and who takes responsibility for it. At the end of the day, these are just tools, but they're a different type of tool. It's not a tool like a hammer or a computer that runs an app. It's not a human, but
Yeah.
it's in between. It's a new thing. And so we got to treat it kind of like a human, and we got to treat it kind of like a tool. And, I think that's where looking at like this model of, what we all do today as work for hire. You need an app, you hire me to build an app, and I build it according to your specifications. And if you hired me and you told me to build something that happens to be illegal, it's not my fault. It's you wrote the spec, you hired me to build it, you're gonna get in trouble.
Right.
I'm not. If you hired me to build that app and I put a back door in it that did something bad, then I'm liable. And I think there's something to that equation where that kind of a middle ground where, you know, if I think allowing for fair use to train these models is something we have to do because if everybody's going to do it anyway,
Right.
they've already shown that. You can debate whether it's legal or not all day long, but people are doing it. And I think the benefits to society are so great that we should allow that.
Right.
But if you take a model that happens to have been trained on content from a publisher that didn't want it in there, and you produce a product using that ML that violates their copyright, or that if you would have produced it as a human, you would have violated their copyright, you should be liable for that,
Yep.
not the AI or the AI company. You're the one violating copyright there, not the AI. And I think just because the AI has, you know, a very deep and accurate sense of a lot of content, um, what a lot of people don't realize is it doesn't have like exact copies of all of the content.
Right.
It's actually very difficult to get an LLM to spit out a full newspaper article from a publisher.
Right.
And the few times where that's sort of kind of been done, I think that should be treated as a bug. That's a bug in the model, and we should just fix it. You know, and ultimately, the people using these tools are the ones that should be held responsible for how they're using them, just like we do for a gun or any other thing that is dangerous, a copy machine,
A pen.
a pen. Yeah, it's like you take somebody and stab them with your pen, you should be liable, not the person that made the pen. And I think that's what we're going to have to figure out.
Um, so we agree that there's a potential massive effect in the workforce. I think we already said that. What do you think about governments? And let's tie this back with some people are talking about universal basic income. Some people are talking about there's going to be changes that are going to massively disrupt the society, and we need to think about different systems. Do you think about that? And if you do, what are your thoughts? Where does your mind go? I know it's hard to like go too far in the future because we don't know, right? But how far do you go?
Too far sometimes. I think generally speaking, and I'm not even talking about any given country, but like generally speaking, I think governments are even slower than corporations.
Right.
And that worries me because this is all moving really quickly. And I think that's the core of the concern that I have. I'm not what you would call a techno optimist or a doomsdayer. I'm in the middle, and I think yes, these tools are great, and they could bring us to a great place, but it's going to happen really quickly. And what I worry is that no government will react fast enough, and companies will start massively changing their behaviors, which is their right to do. And there's going to be a lot of people that are left out of work.
Yeah.
And I don't think it takes a lot of thinking or deep analysis to see that that's going to happen. It's already starting to happen. You can see the announcements from Facebook and some of the other big tech companies, like they're already publicly saying we are not hiring anymore because our LLM buddies are doing a good job.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like that's not a debatable thing anymore. It's happening. And so now, what does that mean for the crop of new, computer programmers? Same thing is going to happen in I think all or most what you might consider white collar work.
Yeah.
You know, you look at how the Industrial Revolution took uh, most of society was doing what you might call blue collar labor. They were using their muscles to do some sort of labor.
Right.
And the Industrial Revolution rolled that over, and now, 90% of us don't do that anymore. And I think the same thing's going to happen with, the rest of the labor.
Yeah.
And so now what type of labor is left?
Yeah.
If we're not using our muscles and we don't need to use our minds, what are we going to do? and and then what you can layer in there is, well, a lot of people say, well, every time we've had a technology roll through, we've always found more to do with it.
Yeah.
Okay, great. But if nobody can work to afford those new things, who's your customer going to be?
Oh yeah.
And so I'm hoping, really, really hoping what happens is that we start on a trajectory to go towards what you see with Star Trek. I'm a big sci-fi nerd, and in the Star Trek series, it's nobody has to work. They do what they enjoy. There's certainly politics and various other command structures, but like you don't have to labor to live. Everybody gets these basic human needs met. And what do we do with that newfound capacity? Explore the universe.
Right.
Like 20, 50 years from now, I hope that's what we're doing and that we have figured some of these things out. Uh, you know, could easily go the other way where we end up in a Gibson-esque universe where we're all gig workers and nobody can make a living except the top 0.1%, and they all live in glorious high rises in pure luxury. That could also happen. And the bad stuff that comes with that. So I don't know which way it's going to go.
I hope we go the Star Trek way.
Yeah, me too.
That's so when you dream about the most exciting good stuff that will happen, do you think about finding cures for diseases, finding
Oh yeah.
finding remedies for climate change, finding ways to explore the stars? Where do your dreams go on that way?
Yeah, yeah. I'm particularly excited. I'm not very knowledgeable about biology, but that's where a lot of the initial um, research is being done on the superintelligence and seeing if these AIs can do stuff that we haven't been able to do as humans. Can they invent new proteins? And can they solve these diseases, these cancers and various other kind of diseases? And it's kind of looking pretty promising.
Yeah.
And I think that's terribly exciting. If we, those of us that are alive even right now, we might be one of the first generations to live to 120, 150
Yeah.
years old
Yeah.
because of what AI is going to be able to do over the next 5 or 10 years. And it's, it's getting into stuff that humans just can't comprehend, and it's also happening in electronics. There's a paper that came out a few weeks ago, and a lab had a specially trained model in chip design.
Yeah.
Um, they had it design a chip, and what it produced was incomprehensible to the humans, but it worked, and it worked well. Why? Nobody there. I didn't go back and look like this week, but like they're probably still trying to figure out why it works. But the fact that it works is terrifically exciting.
It is. It is.
If they can take our chips that we've designed with our monkey brains and redesign them so that they're 1,000 times more powerful, that'll get us to Star Trek really quick.
It's super exciting. Let me ask you one last question. how do you go through this on your daily life? For everyone that is listening, anyone that is going like, it's hard to keep up. There's so many things going on. Uh, I get anxious. Um, how do you turn it into like daily? Okay, life keeps going. You're doing your work. You're learning more. Um, any advice for the audience there on how do you go about your daily life when all of this is happening and moving so fast?
Yeah, I think be as informed as you want to be. I mean, I personally like to be super informed on this stuff. And so every day, every morning for about an hour and a half, I read about 100 different news feeds. I listen to a few podcasts, and that helps kind of put a lot of the stress of the unknown out of my mind,
Right.
personally. I think when you talk about, how is this going to impact you in the future, I think what folks probably need to realize is they can be as stressed out about this as they want, um, but I don't think anybody's going to stop it at this point.
Right.
And once you realize that you know it's happening, you're not going to stop it. Then I think figuring out how to use it to your benefit. Say you're an artist today. You draw or paint or something like this, and you do it for a living. Maybe you're a graphic designer, and you look at it and say, well, AI is stealing my work, and now anybody can reproduce my work. Well,
Right.
sure. Don't don't complain about it. Use it. Use it. There is nothing stopping you as the creator of that particular style of art, let's say. There's nothing stopping you from using an AI, training it on your own work privately,
Right.
and using that to produce a million personalized t-shirts with your art on it for everybody that loves your art. You don't need to wait for a bad guy to do that. You do it. You make
Right.
the millions of dollars because it's your art. And don't sit there and say that it's stealing or it's some bad guy is going to take over my job. It's like you take over your job. And to me, that's the way to look at it is, you know, get into these tools, use them, and a lot of that stress will kind of start to go away because you'll get more comfortable with it, and the stress will turn into excitement because now, you know, maybe you're a mid-level developer and you were really stressed out that you were going to get laid off, but now you realize that using ChatGPT, you can you can do that startup idea that was in your head, and you don't even need to hire any help.
Right.
You can do it all on your own now. And to me, that we're going to go into some times that are pretty exciting for a while because that productivity gain will be there, and we are not going to be laying lots of people off. But at some point, it's gonna stop. But you know, in this interim period, that's what you do. So that's what we should be telling our kids and our juniors is, use this stuff. Spend a lot of time with it every day until you master it and can be more productive.
Jason, that's a great way to end the conversation. Very, very good advice. I love it. Thank you so much for the conversation that we had, for all the knowledge that you shared, for the passion that you have for it. It was a pleasure, and I hope we can get to do this again in the future.
Likewise, thank you.